The orchard stretched across acres of golden soil, its rows of apple and peach trees standing proud against the rolling hills. For years I had poured every ounce of sweat and patience into this land, nurturing it from a barren patch into something beautiful. It wasn't just my livelihood, it was my legacy. Every sunrise began with the chirping of birds in the branches and ended with the comforting scent of fruit ripening in the sun. But this year, the peace that wrapped around my orchard felt fragile. The county had declared a total fire ban after months of dry heat and no rain. Not a single flame was allowed to burn anywhere, not even for cooking. The air itself felt like it could ignite. I followed every rule, triple-checking that no spark came near my land. But not everyone respected the danger. The neighboring community, run by the Silver Valley Homeowners Association, carried an arrogance that matched their million-dollar homes. They lived behind perfect hedges and marble driveways, pretending their wealth gave them control over nature itself. At the head of their little empire was Karen, the HOA president, a woman who smiled like a politician and spoke like a dictator. She had made it clear she despised my orchard. "It looks too rural," she once said, wrinkling her nose as if dirt was a disease. The HOA had been pushing to expand their neighborhood for years, and my orchard was the last piece of land they couldn't touch. I had refused every offer, no matter how large. But something in Karen's eyes told me she wasn't used to hearing the word no. That summer, as the air grew hotter and the drought worsened, I could feel a storm building, one that wouldn't come from the sky but from the people next door. Karen's obsession with my orchard grew into something ugly. Every time she passed my property, her expensive car would slow just enough for her to glare through the window, like my land had personally insulted her. She started sending me warning letters from the HOA, claims that my fence was an eyesore, that the color of my barn clashed with community aesthetics, and even that my tractor noise was disturbing the peace. I wasn't even part of their association, but that didn't stop her from acting like she owned me too. The more I ignored her letters, the more personal her attacks became. One morning I found a bright orange notice nailed to my gate, demanding I remove my orchard sign because it didn't fit neighborhood standards. A few days later, she showed up herself, wearing oversized sunglasses and perfume strong enough to choke a horse. "You're holding back progress," she said, smiling that fake smile of hers. "This land could be worth so much more if you just sell. Think of what you could do with all that money." I told her politely to leave. Her smile vanished. "You'll regret this," she said softly before walking away. After that, the harassment became relentless. My water line was mysteriously shut off one morning. Someone dumped trash bags full of leaves near my fence, and every week, HOA inspectors came around pretending to check for code violations. The last straw came when she started spreading rumors that my orchard was infested, that it posed a fire hazard to the community. It was pure manipulation, a setup for something worse. I could feel it coming. Karen didn't just want to get rid of me, she wanted to make an example out of me, and she was willing to break every rule to do it. It was late in the evening when I first smelled the smoke. At first, I thought it was coming from somewhere far away, a faint, distant scent carried by the dry wind. But within minutes, the smell thickened, turning sharp and bitter. My dog started barking wildly from the porch. I stepped outside, and that's when I saw it. An orange glow flickering through the rows of my trees. For a second, my mind refused to believe what my eyes were seeing. Then reality hit me like a punch. My orchard was burning. I sprinted across the dirt, the heat growing fiercer with every step. Flames licked the bark of my apple trees, racing from one row to another as the wind fanned them higher. The fire moved with terrifying speed, consuming everything I'd built in minutes. I grabbed my hose, but the pressure was useless against the inferno. I tried using buckets, shovels, anything, but the flames were merciless. They roared and cracked, as if laughing at my desperation. I called the fire department, my voice shaking. By the time the first siren wailed in the distance, half the orchard was already gone. Neighbors stood on their balconies, filming, whispering. Some pretended to look sorry. Others just stared. And among them, I caught a glimpse of Karen standing near her car, her arms crossed. The firelight danced across her face, and for a split second I could have sworn she was smiling. When the firefighters finally arrived, it was too late. They managed to stop the flames before they reached my house, but everything else was gone. My orchard, my work, my future. all reduced to blackened earth and ash. I stood in silence as smoke curled into the night sky, realizing someone had wanted this to happen. And deep down I already knew who. The next morning I walked through the ruins of what used to be my life. The air was thick with the acrid scent of smoke and wet ash. The trees that had once stood proud and green were now nothing more than blackened skeletons. Charred fruit clung stubbornly to branches, shriveled and lifeless. Every step I took crunched against the brittle remains of soil that had once been rich and full of promise. I felt hollow inside, like the fire had burned straight through me too. The firefighters had left just before dawn, their faces weary and apologetic. The official report, they said, would likely classify it as accidental ignition. Accidental, like flames had simply decided to appear out of nowhere. When the investigators came, they walked around, snapped a few photos, asked routine questions, and left just as quickly. No one seemed interested in finding the truth. That same afternoon, the HOA released a statement offering their condolences and reminding residents to maintain safe properties. The audacity of it almost made me laugh. Karen even stopped by, dressed in a crisp white blouse and crocodile tears. "Such a tragedy," she said softly, pretending to wipe her eyes. "If only you'd taken better precautions." Her tone carried poison under every word. But later that evening, while sifting through the ashes near the north fence, something caught my eye. A metal canister, half melted but still bearing the faint print of the HOA's maintenance logo. It reeked of fuel. I stared at it for a long time, my hands trembling, rage burning hotter than the fire ever had. That was my proof. I didn't tell a soul. Not yet. I buried the evidence under a tarp inside my shed, cleaned up the debris, and kept my silence. They thought they'd destroyed me, but I was just getting started. Weeks passed, but the pain didn't fade. It hardened into something colder, sharper. Every time I looked out at the blackened land, I saw their faces, the smirk on Karen's lips, the fake sympathy in her voice, the way the HOA acted like nothing had happened. But I didn't lash out. I stayed quiet, rebuilding bit by bit, because I knew silence would make them careless. I cleared the debris, repaired the fences, and installed new irrigation systems. What no one knew was that every new post and pole had a hidden purpose. Tiny cameras, motion sensors, and heat detectors were buried across my land. This time, if they came near, I'd see it all. Karen must have thought she'd broken me. The HOA barely acknowledged my existence anymore. Until I overheard one of the workers talking about the upcoming Silver Valley Summer Gala. It was supposed to be their grand celebration, hosted on the main lawn overlooking my property. They planned to end the night with fireworks. Fireworks, during an active fire ban that had just been extended by the county. My jaw clenched as I listened, realizing how reckless they were. They had burned down my orchard under that same ban, and now they were about to tempt fate again, drunk on arrogance. That night, I reviewed the footage from my cameras, checking the wind patterns and weather reports. Everything pointed to one fact. The dry winds were set to shift toward their neighborhood on the night of the gala. I didn't plan revenge, I didn't have to. Nature had already taken sides. I simply waited, preparing my equipment, making sure every moment would be recorded. They wanted to play with fire again. This time, I'd let the flames write the ending they deserved. The night of the gala arrived with the kind of stillness that comes before a storm. The sky was an eerie shade of gray, and the dry wind slithered through the valley, restless and unpredictable. From my porch, I could see the HOA's lavish setup. Tents lined with fairy lights, tables covered in white linen, and luxury cars gleaming under spotlights. Laughter echoed across the fields as the wealthy residents gathered, dressed in shimmering clothes, pretending the drought and fire ban didn't exist. Karen stood at the center of it all, glowing in a gold dress, raising her glass like a queen addressing her loyal subjects. I sat quietly with my camera equipment ready, every lens pointed toward their main lawn. I'd installed a new weather monitor that afternoon, and I watched as the wind speed picked up, slowly turning direction. By 9 p.m., the breeze that had been drifting away from their homes began shifting, pushing directly toward the neighborhood. My stomach tightened. They had no idea what was coming. Then, with a loud crack, the first fireworks shot into the sky. Cheers erupted as red and gold lights exploded overhead. One after another, rockets launched higher, brighter, louder. Each one a blatant violation of the law. The dry grass around the field shimmered under the sparks, and I could almost feel the heat even from my porch. My cameras recorded everything: the HOA banners, the illegal fireworks. Karen's face lit with arrogance. Minutes later I saw it happen. A single ember drifted downward, carried by the changing wind. It landed somewhere near the edge of their neighborhood, followed by another and another. First no one noticed, but then a scream broke through the music. A faint orange glow flickered near one of the homes. The wind had turned, and so had fate. The moment the first roof caught fire, chaos ripped through the party. Guests screamed and scattered as the wind howled across the valley, feeding the flames like gasoline. The fire that had started as a few glowing embers leapt to life, racing from one manicured lawn to another. I watched from my porch, frozen, as walls of orange light swallowed the neighborhood that once mocked me. The same wind that had carried smoke from my burning orchard was now roaring back through their pristine streets, turning luxury into kindling. Karen's voice cut through the noise, shrill and panicked. She was shouting orders, trying to control the inferno as if her HOA authority could command fire itself. But nature didn't listen to rules or fines. The fireworks they had launched kept detonating, shooting sparks into the air and raining embers over more rooftops. It was madness. Music still blaring through the speakers, lights flashing, people running in every direction. The heat rolled across the valley in waves, searing the air. I lifted my camera and began recording the entire scene, every desperate moment. It wasn't satisfaction I felt, it was something deeper, quieter. The universe was simply correcting itself. The same arrogance that had destroyed my orchard was now consuming their empire. Flames climbed the walls of Karen's mansion, devouring the grand balcony where she had once lectured me about community standards. Fire trucks arrived, but the roads were too narrow and crowded with fleeing cars. The firefighters focused on saving lives, not property. Within minutes, the fire had grown too large to contain. I could see reflections of the blaze in my windows, the sky glowing a furious red. The flames had turned around, just as if the earth itself had decided to return what they had taken from me. The firestorm tore through the hills like a living creature, unstoppable and furious. Flames leapt from rooftop to rooftop, devouring everything in their path. The HOA's perfect lawns turned to black ash, their decorative hedges bursting into sparks. The air thundered with collapsing beams and exploding propane tanks. Even from my porch the heat was unbearable, a searing wave that made my skin prickle. I could hear the faint cries of panic echoing through the valley, voices calling for help, the wail of sirens blending with the crackling roar of destruction. Karen's mansion went up first. The golden light from her chandelier flickered wildly before disappearing in the smoke. She stood in the driveway, clutching her designer purse like it would save her, screaming at firefighters to do something. But they couldn't. The fire had claimed the entire ridge, jumping from her home to the vice president's, then to the treasurer's. Every name on that HOA board, every person who had conspired to ruin me, was losing their kingdom one flame at a time. I didn't move. I just stood there watching silently, my camera still recording. The irony wasn't lost on me. Months ago they had set fire to my orchard during a burn ban, confident they'd never face consequences. Now, during the same ban, their recklessness had turned against them. No one could spin this as an accident. The firefighters eventually pushed the crowd back, focusing on containment. Helicopters circled overhead, dumping water and foam, but it barely made a difference. The blaze had taken control, and when dawn finally crept over the horizon, Silver Valley, once the pride of luxury living, was reduced to a smoldering wasteland. The same people who thought they owned everything now stood with nothing but smoke and ruin behind them. When the smoke finally cleared, the aftermath was devastating and undeniable. The county investigators arrived quickly, drawn by the magnitude of the fire and the staggering losses. They combed through the debris, documenting every melted roof, every scorched driveway, and every burned-out vehicle. And then they saw the evidence: fireworks remnants, clearly launched in violation of the extended fire ban, and charred remains of the HOA's own banners and decorations. The video footage I had captured from my porch became crucial. It showed Karen and the board lighting fireworks recklessly, laughing as sparks drifted into dry grass. The investigators didn't need persuasion. Laws had been broken, and the proof was irrefutable. Insurance companies refused to cover the damages, citing gross negligence. The HOA, once untouchable in its bubble of wealth, faced criminal charges and civil suits from their own residents, some of whom had lost everything. Karen tried to deny responsibility, claiming the fire was an accident. But the evidence was overwhelming. Her lies crumbled under scrutiny, and for the first time, she couldn't charm or intimidate her way out of trouble. Every fine they had imposed on me for imagined violations, every threat and smear, suddenly seemed hollow and petty in the face of their ruin. Meanwhile, my own name was cleared. The authorities recognized that I had followed every law, every precaution. My orchard, though destroyed, was officially acknowledged as a victim of their recklessness. County officials even arranged compensation for my losses, though no amount of money could fully restore what had burned. But standing on my land, looking toward the charred remains of the HOA neighborhood, I felt a quiet satisfaction. Justice had been served, not through anger or planning, but through the truth and the consequences that nature and recklessness had delivered. For the first time in months I felt peace. The fire had taken my orchard, yes, but it had also taken away the fear and oppression that Karen and her board had imposed on me. The balance had been restored and I was finally free to rebuild, this time without anyone daring to threaten me. Months passed and life slowly began to return to the valley, though nothing would ever be quite the same. I stood on the edge of my land, surveying the blackened remnants of my orchard, and felt a strange sense of calm. Where devastation had once ruled, new possibilities now stirred. I cleared the last of the charred debris and began planting again, carefully selecting young trees that promised resilience and abundance. Each seedling was a symbol, not just of recovery, but of endurance, patience, and the quiet strength that comes from surviving what others try to destroy. Across the ridge, the remains of the HOA mansion stood as ghostly reminders of arrogance and recklessness. Roofs had collapsed, windows were shattered, and their once perfect lawns were now a tangle of blackened earth and ash. Nature had leveled the playing field in a way no court could. Karen and her board were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives, dealing with insurance denials, legal battles, and the weight of public humiliation. The people who had once sneered at my orchard now faced the reality of their own vulnerability. As I planted the first rows of new trees, I reflected on the journey. I had lost everything I had built, yet I was still standing. The fire had destroyed my orchard, but it had also exposed the truth about my neighbors, their greed, and their sense of entitlement. I realized that revenge, though satisfying in its own way, had never been mine to wield. Nature had simply restored balance. By late afternoon, the sun cast a golden glow across the new saplings, and a gentle breeze rustled through the valley. Life had returned, fragile but unstoppable. My orchard would grow again, stronger and more resilient than before. And in the distance, where the ashes of the HOA's empire still smoldered, a quiet lesson lingered. Those who play with fire often forget that flames always seek their source. For the first time in a long while I smiled, knowing that the land and I had survived.